The easiest person to underestimate is the one who never argues back. The laughter echoed through the lower security corridor of the Jefferson Federal Courthouse before the morning docket had even begun. Lawyers hurried past with briefcases, deputies checked credentials, reporters adjusted their cameras, and no one realized that history was quietly waiting just beyond the metal detectors. Standing alone near the inspection desk was a composed black woman in a simple navy coat, carrying nothing more than a leather portfolio and an expression so calm it almost seemed untouched by the tension around her. Her name was Naomi Brooks, but not a single person in that hallway bothered to ask. Instead, they saw what they expected to see rather than who stood before them. Officer Daniel Cooper folded his arms as he watched her approach. Beside him, Officers Ryan Mills and Ethan Walker exchanged knowing glances that carried years of unchecked assumptions. The courthouse was hosting one of the most anticipated corruption trials in the state that morning, drawing federal observers, local media, and attorneys from across Virginia. Every entrance was under heightened security, every hallway filled with nervous anticipation. Identification, Cooper said flatly. Naomi reached into her portfolio with slow, deliberate movements, but before she could present anything, another deputy interrupted, insisting the credentials appeared suspicious. A few people nearby slowed their pace, sensing an uncomfortable confrontation yet choosing the safer path of silent observation. Naomi never raised her voice. She simply looked from one officer to another with steady eyes that revealed neither fear nor anger. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said quietly. "Please verify through the clerk's office." Her words were met with impatient smiles instead of procedure. Someone muttered that anyone could claim to belong inside a courthouse. Another joked that pretending to be important had become fashionable lately. A few nervous chuckles drifted through the hallway before disappearing into an uneasy silence. The officers insisted she accompany them into a nearby security room to resolve the matter. Naomi complied without resistance, her footsteps measured, her posture dignified, as though she understood something the rest of the building did not. Behind the closed door, time seemed to slow. Outside, announcements echoed through the marble corridors as court staff searched for someone who had not yet arrived. Clerks checked schedules twice. Attorneys glanced repeatedly toward the courtroom entrance. Reporters whispered that the presiding judge was unusually late. No one connected those growing concerns with the quiet woman now sitting inside a plain security office only a few yards away. Cooper believed he was protecting the courthouse from deception. Ryan believed appearances rarely lied. Ethan followed because experience had taught him that questioning senior officers often created more problems than it solved. Yet none of them noticed the leather portfolio resting untouched on the table, its embossed federal seal catching the fluorescent light whenever someone opened the door. Naomi folded her hands in her lap and waited without complaint. Every passing minute tightened an invisible thread stretching across the entire courthouse. Somewhere above them, the courtroom filled to capacity. Somewhere else, a chief clerk checked the clock again, then reached for the phone with growing concern. And in that ordinary room, where assumptions had quietly replaced patience, the first irreversible mistake of the day had already been made. The security office felt smaller with every passing minute, not because the walls moved but because certainty had begun to crowd out common sense. Officer Daniel Cooper leaned against the desk, convinced that experience had already answered every question before any evidence needed to be examined. Officer Ryan Mills sorted through the contents of Naomi Brooks's leather portfolio without urgency, stopping occasionally to glance at papers that meant little to him because he had already decided what he believed. Officer Ethan Walker remained near the door, quieter than the others, watching the woman seated across from them with growing uncertainty. Naomi never demanded special treatment. She never raised her voice or challenged anyone's authority. Instead, she sat with remarkable composure, her hands resting lightly together as though patience had become second nature after years inside courtrooms where every word carried weight. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while the courthouse beyond the closed door continued moving toward a schedule that no longer made sense. Upstairs, attorneys exchanged puzzled looks as empty minutes accumulated. Court reporters checked their watches. Jurors waited in respectful silence. The gallery slowly filled with journalists hoping to witness testimony that many believed could expose years of official misconduct. Yet the chair reserved for the presiding judge remained empty. Chief Clerk Margaret Ellis stood outside courtroom 4, reviewing her notes for the third time. Judge Naomi Brooks had never been late to a hearing. Not once in her entire judicial career. Margaret called chambers. No answer. She contacted courthouse administration. Nothing. She reached out to judicial security, assuming perhaps an unexpected delay had occurred at the entrance. The response she received was vague, offering no useful information, only assurances that someone would investigate. Meanwhile, inside the security office, Ryan finally lifted a dark blue credential wallet from the bottom of Naomi's portfolio. He opened it halfway before Cooper dismissed it with a casual wave. Counterfeit credentials are getting better every year, he remarked, never bothering to inspect the identification closely. Naomi watched without visible frustration. Please contact Chief Clerk Margaret Ellis, she said evenly. She will confirm everything within 60 seconds. Cooper shook his head. If your story depends on someone rescuing it, then it probably is not much of a story. Ethan shifted his weight uneasily. Something about the woman's confidence refused to match the situation they believed they had uncovered. She did not bargain. She did not invent excuses. She simply waited, as though time itself would eventually introduce everyone properly. Outside, another announcement echoed through the marble halls requesting all parties for the corruption trial report immediately to courtroom 4. Lawyers hurried past the security corridor carrying thick binders of evidence. Television crews adjusted microphones. Federal observers quietly entered the courtroom and took reserved seats near the front. The atmosphere no longer reflected ordinary anticipation. It carried the unmistakable feeling that something important had gone wrong. Margaret Ellis abandoned her office and began searching the building herself. She stopped deputies, questioned courthouse staff, and retraced every possible route Judge Brooks could have taken since arriving that morning. Each unanswered question deepened the silence hanging over the courthouse. Back inside the security office, Naomi slowly looked toward the wall clock. The hearing was scheduled to begin 5 minutes ago, she said softly. A great many people are waiting. Cooper answered with quiet confidence. They can wait a little longer. Naomi held his gaze for only a moment before lowering her eyes again. She offered no argument, no warning, and no anger. It was that calm acceptance, more than anything else, that Ethan found impossible to understand. Somewhere beyond the closed door, hurried footsteps approached the corridor, and for the first time that morning, the rhythm of the courthouse began to change. The footsteps outside the security office grew louder until they blended into the restless heartbeat of the courthouse itself. Chief Clerk Margaret Ellis moved quickly through the corridor, stopping every deputy she recognized, asking the same question with increasing urgency. Has anyone seen Judge Naomi Brooks? Every answer was the same uncertain shake of the head. The hearing could not begin without its presiding judge, and every passing minute placed more pressure on a courthouse already carrying the weight of national attention. Inside the small office, however, time seemed frozen. Daniel Cooper glanced through the narrow window in the door before turning back toward Naomi with the confidence of a man who believed procedure was always on his side. Ryan Mills placed the credential wallet back onto the table without examining the judicial seal embossed across its cover. Ethan Walker remained silent, his attention drifting repeatedly toward the hallway where unusual activity continued to build. Naomi watched none of them with resentment. Instead, she observed the room itself, the faded government paint, the old wall clock ticking with perfect consistency, the stack of incident reports waiting to be signed, and the courthouse map hanging beside the exit. It reminded her of countless mornings spent reminding young attorneys that justice depended as much upon patience as it did upon law. She had learned long ago that people revealed their true character when they believed no one important was watching. The irony of that lesson did not escape her now. Beyond the office walls, courtroom 4 had become unusually quiet. Reporters lowered their voices. Federal observers exchanged brief conversations while reviewing confidential folders. The corruption trial scheduled for that morning had already attracted statewide attention because it centered on allegations of misconduct involving several law enforcement officials. For weeks, legal analysts had predicted that the judge assigned to oversee the proceedings would set the tone for public confidence in the judicial system. No one imagined that the greatest test of that principle was unfolding one floor below. Margaret Ellis finally reached the main security checkpoint and paused as she noticed the sign-in log. Judge Brooks had entered the building exactly on schedule. The timestamp left no room for doubt. She thanked the deputy working the desk before following the recorded route toward the secondary inspection corridor. Every instinct told her that the answer had been close all along. Back inside the office, Naomi slowly turned toward Ethan. "How long have you worked here?" she asked gently. The unexpected question caught him off guard. "Almost 2 years," he answered. Naomi nodded with quiet understanding. "Then you already know that every courthouse has 2 responsibilities. One is security. The other is fairness. Neither works well without the other." Ethan did not reply. Her words carried no accusation, only calm reflection, and somehow that made them more difficult to dismiss. Cooper interrupted before the conversation could continue. "This discussion is over until we verify your identity." Naomi simply inclined her head. "That is precisely what I have been requesting." Silence settled once more. Then, from somewhere just beyond the hallway, a familiar voice called out with unmistakable urgency. "Judge Brooks! Judge Brooks, are you here?" Margaret Ellis was closer now than anyone inside the room realized, and with every step she took, the distance between assumption and truth quietly disappeared. Margaret Ellis stopped outside the security office as muffled voices reached her through the closed door. She knocked once, then opened it without waiting for permission. Relief flashed across her face the instant she saw Naomi Brooks sitting calmly in the chair. "Judge Brooks," she said, almost breathless, "we have been searching the entire courthouse for you." Before Naomi could answer, Daniel Cooper stepped forward, lifting one hand as though to control the conversation. "Ma'am, we are conducting a security verification." Margaret looked at him in disbelief. "Security verification? The entire courtroom is waiting for Judge Brooks." Cooper frowned, convinced there had to be some misunderstanding. This individual presented questionable identification. Margaret turned toward Naomi, who simply offered the faintest reassuring smile. "Did you have the opportunity to contact my office?" Naomi asked quietly. Margaret hesitated for only a second before answering. "No. We were never notified." The words settled over the room like heavy winter air. Ryan Mills reached for the credential wallet again, this time opening it completely. His eyes moved across the official seal, the Judicial Commission, the federal appointment order, and the unmistakable signature authorizing Naomi Brooks to preside over the very corruption trial scheduled to begin that morning. His face slowly lost its confidence. Ethan Walker leaned closer, reading the documents for himself. Every page matched the records stored within the courthouse system. Every identification number aligned perfectly. No counterfeit. No deception. Only a series of assumptions that had quietly replaced verification. Cooper remained silent for several long seconds before forcing a composed expression. If there has been an administrative delay, we can clear this up quickly. Naomi stood gracefully, smoothing the sleeve of her navy coat with calm precision. Administrative delays happen, she replied gently. Assumptions are different. No accusation filled her voice. No anger. Only a simple observation that somehow carried greater weight than any raised voice could have. Outside the office, courthouse staff hurried past with increasingly anxious expressions. Courtroom 4 had now fallen more than 15 minutes behind schedule. Television crews speculated about an unexpected judicial emergency. Attorneys checked messages from impatient clients. Inside the building, rumors traveled faster than facts, each version becoming less accurate than the last. Margaret looked toward Naomi with quiet concern. "Judge, everyone is assembled." Naomi nodded once. "Then we should not keep them waiting any longer." Ryan instinctively stepped aside to clear the doorway. Ethan did the same without being asked. Cooper remained motionless until Margaret fixed him with a look that required no explanation. Only then did he move away from the entrance. As Naomi walked into the corridor, conversations around her gradually faded. Employees recognized her almost immediately. Some lowered their eyes in embarrassment. Others stood silently, realizing that the woman who had passed through the courthouse unnoticed only minutes earlier was now the very person entrusted to oversee one of the most important proceedings in recent state history. Naomi neither acknowledged the whispers nor paused to address the confusion spreading through the hallway. She simply continued toward courtroom 4 with steady, measured steps. Behind her, Cooper, Ryan, and Ethan exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time that morning, each of them understood that the most significant judgment of the day might begin long before anyone entered the courtroom, and it would not be measured by authority, appearance, or confidence, but by whether fairness had been honored from the very first moment. The double doors to courtroom 4 opened with quiet dignity, and every conversation inside faded into complete silence. Attorneys rose from their seats. Jurors straightened in the jury box. Reporters lowered their cameras for a brief moment out of respect for the court. Naomi Brooks entered without haste, carrying only the same leather portfolio that had been questioned minutes earlier. There was nothing dramatic about her pace, yet every step seemed to restore order to a morning that had nearly unraveled. Chief Clerk Margaret Ellis announced the opening of the session with practiced confidence, but even she could sense that something unusual lingered beneath the surface. Naomi took her seat behind the bench, adjusted a single folder, and surveyed the courtroom with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the morning. Her eyes briefly met those of Daniel Cooper, Ryan Mills, and Ethan Walker, who now stood near the rear of the courtroom assigned to security detail. None of them could hold her gaze for long. The hearing began with routine procedural matters. Counsel introduced themselves for the record. Witness schedules were confirmed. Court reporters prepared every word for the official transcript. Anyone entering the courtroom at that moment would have believed the day had unfolded exactly as planned. Yet beneath the formal rhythm of legal procedure, 3 officers carried the growing weight of private uncertainty. Ryan replayed every decision made inside the security office. Ethan remembered Naomi's quiet reminder that security and fairness depended upon one another. Cooper focused intently on the proceedings before him, determined not to reveal the doubt beginning to challenge his confidence. Naomi addressed each attorney with professionalism and patience. Her questions were precise, her rulings measured, and her respect for every participant remained unmistakable. She treated each person before the court exactly as the law required, without favoritism or resentment. Watching from the gallery, several reporters quietly remarked on her composure during such a high-profile case. They knew nothing about the events that had delayed the hearing, only that Judge Brooks appeared completely prepared despite the unexpected start. During a brief pause while documents were distributed, Naomi looked toward the courtroom audience. The credibility of any justice system depends upon one simple principle, she said evenly. Every person who enters this courthouse deserves to be evaluated by facts rather than assumptions. That principle protects the innocent, strengthens lawful authority, and preserves public trust. The statement seemed directed to the entire room, yet those standing near the rear understood its meaning more deeply than anyone else present. Cooper lowered his eyes toward the polished courtroom floor. Ethan quietly exhaled. Ryan remained motionless, realizing that the judge had chosen not to embarrass anyone publicly despite having every opportunity to do so. Outside the courtroom, however, unanswered questions were beginning to spread. Security logs showed unusual delays. Administrative supervisors requested explanations for the late start. Surveillance personnel reviewed routine footage to determine why the presiding judge had been held at an inspection point for so long. What had seemed like an isolated misunderstanding was gradually becoming part of a much larger review. Naomi continued the hearing without acknowledging any of it. Her attention remained fixed upon the law, because she understood that justice earned its authority not through emotion but through consistency. Yet somewhere inside the courthouse, official records, security reports, and digital timestamps were quietly coming together, and before the day ended, they would tell a story that no assumption could rewrite. By early afternoon, the courtroom had settled into the steady rhythm that only a well-managed proceeding could maintain, yet beyond the polished wood doors another process had quietly begun. Administrative supervisors reviewing the delayed start requested routine security records, believing they were simply documenting an unusual schedule disruption. Surveillance technicians retrieved camera footage from the entrance corridor, the secondary inspection area, and the security office without knowing that each timestamp would soon fit together like pieces of a carefully assembled puzzle. Inside the courtroom, Judge Naomi Brooks continued hearing arguments with the same measured professionalism she had displayed from the first moment she entered the bench. She listened carefully before every ruling, allowing each attorney the opportunity to present complete arguments. Her voice remained calm, never rushed, never influenced by the attention surrounding the case. Members of the gallery found themselves focusing less on the controversy outside the courtroom and more on the quiet authority with which she guided every discussion. Daniel Cooper remained assigned near the rear entrance, but his attention wandered whenever the courtroom doors opened. Each time a courthouse employee entered carrying another folder or message, he wondered whether it concerned the morning's misunderstanding. Ryan Mills noticed two administrative investigators speaking with security supervisors in the hallway during a brief recess. Neither investigator appeared angry. They simply carried clipboards, compared timestamps, and requested access to official reports. That ordinary professionalism somehow felt more unsettling than any confrontation could have been. Ethan Walker quietly replayed the morning in his mind, remembering every opportunity they had been given to verify Naomi's identity before reaching conclusions. He realized that none of the critical mistakes had resulted from missing information. The information had been available all along. It had simply been ignored. During the afternoon recess, Margaret Ellis approached the bench carrying several administrative documents requiring Judge Brooks's signature. Before leaving, she paused for a moment. The Office of Court Administration has opened a formal procedural review regarding the delayed session, she said quietly enough that only Naomi could hear. Naomi acknowledged the update with a slight nod. They should review everything, she replied. Accurate records protect everyone involved. Margaret studied her expression for a moment. There was no satisfaction, no desire for personal vindication, only a genuine commitment to allowing the established process to discover the truth. That response reminded Margaret why Naomi had earned such extraordinary respect throughout the federal judiciary. She believed justice lost credibility whenever personal emotion replaced careful procedure. As court resumed, Naomi addressed a legal motion concerning the admissibility of evidence. Her explanation emphasized impartiality, transparency, and the responsibility every public institution carried to maintain public confidence. Although the ruling concerned the corruption case before her, the words carried a broader meaning that seemed to settle over the entire courtroom. Public trust, she explained, was built one decision at a time, and every official, regardless of title or position, remained accountable to the same standards. At that very moment, investigators upstairs completed their review of the digital access logs. Every entry matched Naomi Brooks's official arrival time. Every surveillance angle confirmed her movements through the courthouse. Every recorded conversation demonstrated that she had repeatedly requested routine verification through proper channels. The evidence required no dramatic interpretation because the facts spoke with remarkable clarity. Without raising a single accusation herself, Naomi had allowed patience, documentation, and established procedure to reveal what assumptions had tried to conceal, and before the courthouse closed that evening, the truth would no longer belong to private conversations behind closed doors but to the official record itself. The final witness of the afternoon stepped away from the stand, and Judge Naomi Brooks announced a short recess before the next phase of testimony. The sound of the gavel was gentle, yet it carried through the courtroom with unmistakable authority. Attorneys gathered their files, while jurors were escorted to a private room. Reporters hurried into the hallway searching for updates that might explain the unusual delay that had marked the beginning of the day. They soon discovered that courthouse administrators were not avoiding questions. Instead, they were collecting answers. In a conference room 2 floors above, investigators from the Office of Court Administration completed their review of the surveillance recordings. Every camera angle aligned perfectly with the digital access logs. Naomi Brooks had entered the building on time. She had presented herself calmly at the security checkpoint. She had requested verification through the proper judicial channels more than once. She had remained respectful throughout every interaction. The evidence revealed no attempt to bypass security, no false statement, and no refusal to cooperate. The only pattern that emerged was that routine verification had been replaced by assumption before the available facts had been examined. Administrative Director Helen Carter quietly closed the final report and looked around the table. "There is no uncertainty here," she said. "The record is complete." Copies of the preliminary findings were immediately forwarded to courthouse leadership and judicial oversight officials. Meanwhile, Daniel Cooper received a message asking him to report to the administrative office as soon as the court recessed for the day. Ryan Mills and Ethan Walker received identical notifications only moments later. None of the messages explained why. They did not need to. The expressions on the faces of the supervisors delivering them said enough. Back inside courtroom 4, Naomi resumed the hearing with the same disciplined focus she had maintained from the beginning. She ruled on evidentiary questions, clarified scheduling matters, and thanked the jurors for their patience. Not once did she mention the events of the morning. Not once did she allow personal experience to influence the legal process unfolding before her. Those watching carefully began to recognize something remarkable. True authority did not announce itself through emotion. It revealed itself through consistency. During another brief pause, one of the younger attorneys quietly leaned toward a senior colleague and whispered, "I cannot imagine remaining that composed after everything that happened." The older attorney answered without taking his eyes off the bench, "That is exactly why she is sitting there." As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the courtroom floor, the hearing concluded for the day. Naomi thanked everyone for their professionalism and scheduled the next session before rising from the bench. Every person in the courtroom stood as she exited through the secure judicial corridor. Only after the doors closed behind her did conversations begin again. Outside, courthouse employees had already started discussing the administrative review. Facts were replacing rumors with remarkable speed. The official record now existed, supported by timestamps, verified documents, surveillance footage, and witness statements. No dramatic accusation had been necessary because the truth had quietly assembled itself piece by piece. For Daniel Cooper, Ryan Mills, and Ethan Walker, the longest part of the day was no longer behind them. It was waiting in the administrative offices where evidence required no interpretation, where assumptions carried no authority, and where accountability would begin with a simple question that every public servant eventually faces. Did your decisions reflect the facts, or only what you believed before the facts were known? The administrative conference room was quiet enough that every page turning across the long oak table sounded unusually loud. Daniel Cooper, Ryan Mills, and Ethan Walker sat opposite Administrative Director Helen Carter, while members of Judicial Security Standards reviewed the completed report one section at a time. No raised voices filled the room. No dramatic confrontation unfolded. Instead, the facts were presented with the calm precision that defines every credible investigation. Digital entry records confirmed Judge Naomi Brooks had arrived on schedule. Security camera footage documented each interaction from multiple angles. Written statements from courthouse employees matched the electronic timeline almost minute for minute. Most importantly, the report showed that routine verification procedures had been available throughout the encounter, but had not been followed before conclusions were reached. Helen Carter folded her hands before speaking. Public confidence depends upon every person inside this courthouse following the same standards. Those standards exist to protect both the public and the officers who serve them. The words carried neither accusation nor hostility. They reflected the simple expectation that responsibility always accompanies authority. Cooper listened without interruption. For the first time that day, he no longer searched for an explanation that justified his decisions. Ryan stared quietly at the copies of the surveillance images placed before him. Ethan remembered Judge Brooks's calm reminder that fairness and security could never succeed when separated from one another. Before the meeting concluded, the three officers were informed that they would be temporarily reassigned while the formal administrative review continued according to established policy. The decision was procedural rather than personal, intended to preserve the integrity of the review and maintain public confidence in the courthouse. None of them argued. They understood that accountability was not punishment. It was part of the same system they had sworn to uphold. Elsewhere in the building, Judge Naomi Brooks completed the final paperwork from the day's hearing before preparing for the following morning's session. Margaret Ellis entered chambers carrying several updated scheduling documents. She hesitated before speaking. The preliminary review has been completed. Naomi looked up from the case file. I expected it would be. Margaret studied her carefully. You knew the evidence would support everything that happened. Naomi closed the folder gently. Evidence is not supposed to support people. It is supposed to support the truth. Margaret smiled quietly, recognizing once again why colleagues across the federal judiciary respected her judgment. She had never viewed the law as a tool for personal victory. She viewed it as a promise that facts would eventually matter more than assumptions. By evening, courthouse staff had already begun discussing the review as an important reminder rather than a scandal. New training sessions were scheduled to reinforce verification procedures, respectful communication, and impartial decision-making during security screenings. Supervisors emphasized that every visitor deserved to be treated with professionalism regardless of appearance, background, or first impressions. The lesson spread quickly because it had emerged from documented facts instead of public outrage. As the courthouse lights gradually dimmed and employees headed home, the building felt different from the way it had that morning. Nothing about its marble halls or polished courtrooms had changed, yet the people walking through them carried a deeper understanding of the responsibility entrusted to them. Sometimes justice does not arrive with loud declarations or dramatic victories. Sometimes it appears quietly through careful records, honest reflection, and the courage to allow the truth to correct even those who believed they were already right. The following morning, the Jefferson Federal Courthouse opened its doors with the same familiar routine, yet something had quietly changed. Security officers greeted visitors with greater patience. Clerks took an extra moment to verify information before reaching conclusions. Supervisors reminded every employee that professionalism was measured not by confidence alone, but by the willingness to confirm the facts before making decisions. Lessons learned through experience often remained far longer than those learned through policy manuals. Judge Naomi Brooks arrived at the courthouse just before 8 o'clock carrying the same leather portfolio she had held the day before. This time several employees greeted her warmly as she entered. She acknowledged each person with the same calm smile she had always offered. There was no sign that she expected different treatment because of what had happened. In her mind, respect was meaningful only when it was given freely rather than out of embarrassment. Courtroom 4 filled once again with attorneys, jurors, reporters, and members of the public eager to follow the corruption trial. When Naomi entered, every person rose as required. The room settled into complete silence before she spoke. "Good morning," she began. "Before we continue, I would like to recognize the importance of public trust. Every institution represented in this courtroom carries a responsibility that extends beyond any single case. The law asks us to examine evidence carefully, to question our assumptions honestly, and to remember that every individual deserves to be treated with dignity. Those principles protect all of us equally." No names were mentioned. No personal grievances were revisited. The statement belonged not to one difficult morning but to every future day inside that courthouse. Among those listening were Daniel Cooper, Ryan Mills, and Ethan Walker. Their assignments had changed while the administrative review continued, but they had been permitted to attend the opening of the session as observers. They listened quietly, understanding that the judge standing before them had chosen to strengthen the institution instead of seeking personal satisfaction. That decision left a deeper impression than any public criticism ever could. Weeks later, the procedural review concluded with updated training standards emphasizing verification, impartiality, respectful communication, and accountability throughout courthouse security operations. The recommendations were adopted without controversy because every conclusion rested upon documented facts rather than speculation. New officers would eventually study those procedures without ever knowing the names connected to the events that inspired them. Yet the culture inside the courthouse had undeniably shifted. People paused before making assumptions. They asked one more question. They verified one more document. They remembered that fairness often begins long before a judge enters a courtroom. As Naomi Brooks left the courthouse one evening after another full day of hearings, the setting sun reflected across the marble steps, casting long shadows toward the city beyond. She paused only briefly before continuing toward the sidewalk, knowing that justice was never defined by one ruling or one difficult day. It was built through countless ordinary choices made with integrity when no one expected history to notice. Because authority may open a door, but character determines what happens after you walk through it. And in the end, the strongest voice inside any courtroom is never pride, never power, and never prejudice. It is the quiet truth that waits patiently until every assumption has finally stepped aside.